G'day and welcome to this bonus episode of the Fred Pawle Show on ADH TV. I'm in Tower Hamlets in the East End of London, where 32% of the population comes from Bangladesh and most of the rest come from other third world countries. Now, these people came here presumably seeking a better life, and for all I know, they found it. But as you can see around me, there hasn't been a great attempt to assimilate into British culture, let alone adopt British values. In fact, it's considered dangerous around these parts to wear a Remembrance Day poppy. I was pretty reluctant to wear one myself, actually, but anyway, we'll see how that turns out. The reason for that is that the poppy is associated with colonialism, which of course is an evil thing when it's Britain exporting democracy and freedom to the rest of the world, but not such a bad thing when it's third world migrants bringing their inferior culture to the great cities of Europe. The inferiority of that culture has been on vivid display for the past month at protest march after protest march right across Western liberal democracies, but especially here in Britain, calling for the genocide of the Jewish people and in favour of Hamas, a terrorist organisation. Now, those marches may well reach something of a crescendo this Sunday, when a massive march goes from Hyde Park through the centre of London to the United States Embassy at the same time that the King, Charles, lays a wreath at the cenotaph in remembrance of those who died for our freedoms. We are at a civilizational moment, and it seems like the West has lost its cojones just at the same time when migrants from the third world have found theirs.
The people in this country need to be woken up to the problem that's become with mass immigration.
How do you feel about Hamas?
Hamas, I condemn what they do. As soon as they happened on October 7th, I was, hearing the reports. It's true or not, you never want to hear anything like that, and it's wrong for it to happen. It's just a peaceful march. Nobody wants here to cause trouble. No one's here to kick off with the police or anything like that.
I believe in supporting community initiatives and things, and also bringing some Indigenous solidarity as well. So.
Is there a connection between the Aboriginal cause in Australia and the Palestinian cause?
Yeah, definitely. I think as well the fact that Australia has abstained as well, it says a lot in terms of how their
agreement. From the UN vote, you mean?
From the UN vote, the ceasefire. I feel like it says a lot about their own, and the referendum too within Australia. It says a lot about how they think about settler colonial violence within their country and their complicitness in this one as well.
So do you think the colonisation of Australia was a good thing or a bad thing?
A bad thing, for sure.
Why is that?
I think, gosh, I feel like I'm being put on the spot a bit here.
How do you feel about what Hamas soldiers did to women like yourself on October 7th?
It's not good. It's not like, the thing is oh God.
What's the future of Britain like? I mean, there's a lot of people living in Britain now who don't share British values, don't appreciate British culture. What's the future like?
I don't want to cry on camera, but if I'm honest with you, there's not a lot of future for British people in this country.
Today's rally was meant to be a complement to the rally that happened yesterday, a pro-Palestinian rally. It was the 7th Saturday in succession that the pro-Palestinian crowd had been allowed to take over certain parts of London streets. I've attended a couple of those rallies, and I've got to say, although nothing bad happened, there was a certain tension in the air, which is not surprising given that a lot of people were calling for genocide of the Jews, the destruction of the state of Israel, and in support of Hamas, a terrorist organisation that kills babies and rapes women. Well, nothing like that happened at today's event. Here are some of the people I met in the crowd. There's a lot of hostility towards Jews and Israel at pro-Palestinian events. Is there any hostility towards Palestine here today?
Well, you look around and see if you can find any hate and any screams. I mean, people are not saying Israel from the river to the sea.
It's really painful to see the flags being waved of the people that murdered and raped and traumatized my brothers and sisters.
Hello, mate.
So I've just bumped into Konstantin Kisin at the rally. Konstantin, why are you here, mate?
We're here filming interviews just like you, just wondering why people are here, what they want to say about.
And what have you found out?
Mostly I think people are here to just to show solidarity with Jews. They feel like there's been a lot of anti-Semitism recently, that it's escalated, and they want to come and show support. Basically, that's my sense of it.
I've been to a couple of the pro-Palestinian rallies, and I've got to say they're pretty tense and even hostile affairs. Some people are calling for genocide essentially at those affairs. At this event, do you feel the same hostility by any chance?
No.
Right.
No, I haven't been to those protests, and I will go. So
Yeah.
if I'm starting here,
Yeah.
I sort of imagine it will go downhill, but we'll find out.
We're not out to get anybody. You know, it's not a hate march, it's a love march.
I mean, obviously, anti-Semitism is, is really, you can see it. It's jumped up across the world. So it's just sort of showing that, how disgusted I am at that, and that's why I'm here.
There are alarming political developments going on in Brazil right now that are plunging the nation into what looks certain to be a tragic and frightening state of totalitarian dictatorship. Why should we Australians be concerned about this? Well, there are two very big reasons, apart from whether we should reconsider booking a beach holiday in Rio de Janeiro. Firstly, what's going on in Brazil looks suspiciously similar to what's happening here. In the past week, the Australian and Brazilian governments have both revealed they have an uncannily similar aversion to free speech, especially on X, the social media platform previously known as Twitter.
At any moment, Brazil's Supreme Court could shut off all access to X Twitter for the people of Brazil. It is not an exaggeration to say that Brazil is on the brink of dictatorship at the hands of a totalitarian Supreme Court justice named Alexandre de Moraes. President Lula da Silva is also participating in this push towards totalitarianism.
Sound familiar? Well, we in Australia are not a dictatorship yet either, but we will be if Albo gets his misinformation and disinformation bill up later this year. If you thought China's aggression in the Western Pacific is dangerous, which it is, think about the consequences of China becoming the puppet master in Brazil, which it soon will be. Brazil is 8.5 million square kilometres in size. The United States, just a few thousand kilometres north, is only slightly larger at 9.8 million square kilometres. Its population, Brazil's population in 2022 was 215 million, compared to the United States population of 333. So whoever controls Brazil controls a huge economy and landmass and population within missile range of the United States mainland. How close do you think Brazil is now to totalitarianism?
Well, I think Brazil is already in a totalitarian environment.
Should Australians be worried that we are heading in the same direction as Brazil? Is this a premonition for where we're heading?
Well, look, Lula was supported by the Australian elites.
I genuinely can't get out of bed a lot of the time because it's all just a bit too much.
And if it's all a bit much for you too, never fear. The NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, is here to help. Is that you have a disability caused by a permanent impairment. That sounds fairly daunting, but really it's not. In keeping with these times of equal opportunity, your impairment doesn't need to be entirely physical. Let this young woman explain.
So my mobility is like literally substantially reduced because of all of the combination of my conditions, which is called a psychosocial disability. Remember, buzzword. Use that word, psychosocial disability. If you're like me, you've got many things going on. And this can impact my mobility. I can't move, I can't shower, clean myself.
The NDIS website is explicit. Quote, the impairment may be intellectual, cognitive, neurological, sensory, physical or psychosocial. The NDIS is possibly the biggest prank in Australian political history. But Gillard never quite got around to explaining how the hell we were going to pay for all this. It's now predicted to cost $125 billion a year by 2034. The way things are going, the only way anybody will be able to make money in Australia soon is by either developing a disability, which is difficult under the NDIS's definitions, or by becoming a carer for someone who has. Well, 3 months ago, the High Court of Australia released 147 dangerous criminals into the community. Among them were rapists, murderers, and at least one pedophile who had been convicted of raping a 10-year-old boy. No matter how unwanted these reprobates are among the Australian community, our government can't simply put them on a leaky boat and push them off in the direction of Indonesia, which, funnily enough, is how they arrived here in the first place. There are many reasons for this crisis. The most commonly discussed one is immigration, which is pushing up demand for housing even higher, and the government doesn't seem to care. It's just letting in hundreds of thousands of people anyway. Most will never save enough for a deposit on a house because 11% of their wage is going into a superannuation fund that they can't touch for decades. And to make it even crueler, some of those super funds announced last month that they are going into the, wait for it, housing business. I asked a few students around Sydney University and got a variety of responses, but to be honest, I couldn't find anyone who thought it was a good idea.
Because having a house is so important, and for me personally as well, and I know for a lot of people, it is really hard in this economy with prices being so high that if we have such a large amount of money just put aside that we can't access, it just makes it that much harder.
It would make sense that you can save for a house earlier in your life and then later on use the money you save after you buy your house for your super. I think that makes sense.
But I suppose maybe there should be more considerations from the government with like the cost of living crisis as to how there can be ways to sort of help people who are entering the workforce actually, build their savings and be able to build up like assets. And
Question time in the New South Wales Parliament was disrupted yesterday when this happened. Yeah, I couldn't work out what they were saying either. Protest organisers have vowed to continue staging weekly protests until there is an, quote, end to the genocide and occupation of Palestine. Well, that's handy because there is no genocide. Are people starting to get tired of the endless pro-Palestinian protests? I went out on the streets of Sydney to find out. Do you think the Palestinian protest thing is getting a bit out of hand?
Yes, I do. I don't feel like it's really achieving anything, and it's disruptive to the Sydney community.
About 31,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza.
How do you know it's 31,000?
Well, I don't know officially. That's what they say. We totally get Israel.
Yeah.
And as Americans, they're important to us, and we're important to them also.
You're important to us too, just quietly. So. Yes, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
They have the right to protest in Australia, and especially in Michigan, we have a lot of Muslim background people.
You're from pretty much the most Islamic state in the US, aren't you?
Pretty much, yes.
So how do you feel about Islamic integration? Do you think it's happening?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that.
العمليات هاي تاعت الداعش والسكاكين هاي إشي بيرفع الراس لفلسطين.
And here is Foreign Minister Senator Penny Wong last week reassuring us that UNRWA isn't like that anymore.
The best available current advice from agencies and the Australian government lawyers is that UNRWA is not a terrorist organisation, and that existing and additional safeguards sufficiently protect Australian taxpayer funding.
I'm not convinced. There is a very good chance that your money is about to finance not just the next wave of jihadi barbarians from Gaza, but even more heartbreakingly, will condemn innocent kids to a lifetime of hatred indoctrinated into them by Anwar schools.
There has been so little condemnation, not only of the terrorism of October 7, but of the drivers which led us to that sort of terrorism.
Australia is being colonised again, and this time the result will not be the creation of a thriving nation state or a culture with a solid work ethic combined with an appreciation of freedom, prosperity and individuality. No, the newly colonised Australia will look more like this. This was recorded on Tuesday night in Martin Place, Sydney. At the far end of Martin Place is Sydney's main cenotaph, the memorial to our fallen soldiers, who, if they saw this, would wonder why they bothered fighting at all. 10 years ago, a Muslim terrorist called Man Haron Monis held 18 hostages for 16 hours at what was then called the Lint Cafe. The building where that siege took place and where two innocent Australians, Tory Johnson and Katrina Dawson, lost their lives is only metres from where these people were praying on Tuesday night. It's difficult to imagine anything more insensitive. What Wong is really saying is that Labor cares less about Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, than she does about appeasing Muslims in marginal electorates in the western suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne. The irony is that while Australia extends the hand of friendship to Muslims from the Middle East, they reply by demanding spaces in which to pray and call for the genocide of Jews on our streets. They also generally, with a few exceptions, fail to integrate into our liberal culture. Jews never have and never will be as much of a hassle for the rest of us. The Governor-Generalship is a symbolic position, and Albo has responded with the most symbolic appointment possible. She, quote, represents the best of modern Australia. No, she represents the best of woke Australia. The rest of us couldn't care less about her crusades, busy as we are trying to pay the bills while enlarging our carbon footprints. So, how is this appointment going down among His Majesty's loyal subjects? Let's ask. Have you ever heard of a woman called Samantha Mostyn?
No, I haven't.
She's going to be the Governor-General of Australia from July.
Mm-hmm. Yeah?
You didn't hear about it?
Nah, no, I don't follow.
Have you ever heard of Samantha Mostyn?
Samantha Mostyn. I think I just have today in the news. Well, I don't know anything about her. That was the first time that I heard anything about her. I saw a picture of her and that was it. What is the role of the Governor-General?
Because Samantha Mostyn is quite political. She's very proactive when it comes to things like reconciliation and the environment and women's rights. I'm not saying those are bad things, but she brings those to the job. What do you think?
I think the Governor-General is a diplomatic position, so you've got to be pretty careful what you bring to the job, I think.
Have you ever heard of Samantha Mostyn?
No.
She's going to be the Governor-General of Australia from July.
Oh, good on her.
Have you ever heard of a woman called Samantha Mostyn?
No. Oh, yeah, Moisen? Yeah, she's like the new Governor-General, is that right?
That's correct, well done. How do you feel about the role of Governor-General? Does it have any bearing on your life?
I think we should be a republic, yeah.
Do you think our constitutional monarchy works well?
No. I think we should get rid of it. The monarchy is a very archaic system and serves no purpose, especially in a country like Australia.
With the king himself up to his neck in green zealotry, who is going to object to Sam Mostyn pontificating occasionally on the overuse of fossil fuels by the king's far-flung colonial subjects, or the government of Australia not spending enough of your money on subsidies for windmills and solar panels? And there is the rub. There are still places in the world where freedom and prosperity are valued and the principles that enable them are still respected. Perhaps the one nation where this is more so than all others is Hungary, a nation of only 9.6 million people occupying land less than half the size of Victoria. It has become something of a pilgrimage for conservative thinkers and writers. Hungary harbours a love of freedom, family and free speech, the sort of things that once made Australia such a thriving and independent country. Well, I was lucky enough to visit there myself in a less formal capacity, more like a tourist, in December, and I found the place to be both remarkably friendly, clean and peaceful, but also still haunted by the recent and very troubling past. Hungary was at the start of World War II an ally of the Nazis, then later in the war was ruled by the notoriously cruel Arrow Cross Party, who tortured and murdered thousands of Hungarians, many of them on little more than suspicion of dissent. There is a museum of this in Budapest, which is one of the most horrifying and dark places I've ever visited. I recommend it if you do go there, but be warned, it's not a pleasant place. The country was then occupied by the Soviets, who rather than offering a relief from the Arrow Cross's barbaric rule, just simply continued it. There was a moment in 1956 when a popular uprising looked for a few days like it would force the Soviets to withdraw, but they didn't. Instead, they doubled down their oppressive rule until they finally left in 1991. Even to a tourist, Budapest still exudes a strong memory of a cruel past amid the wonderful renovation that has gone on since the Russians left. Its boulevards of grand buildings, the magnificent St Stephen's Basilica, its charming trams, the Houses of Parliament, which were modelled on the original Parliament in Westminster, London, the art galleries, the bridges over the Danube, the elaborately housed hot baths, and the Buddha Castle, as well as the markets and more pedestrian attractions, combine to make Budapest, I got to say this, a bit like Paris, but with far fewer tourists. A visit will restore your faith in European culture and tradition, even as Western Europe is being destroyed by an invasion of violent and hostile so-called refugees. It's a fantastic, innovative idea that would never get up in Australia. It's a thing called a ruin bar. You might be familiar with it. It is a shot of me in one in Budapest. These are bars that are essentially in, as far as I know, in a condemned sort of industrial-style warehouse or a building in the middle of the city, and bar managers are allowed to occupy them while the owner decides what eventually will happen with the building in the long run. I got to say, doing something like this in Australia would be absolutely unthinkable. The number of government departments you have to go to just to build a new bar, let alone one in a condemned building, is prohibitive. Now, is this kind of thinking natural to Hungarians, or is this the result of Hungary just in a rebuilding phase after the departure of the Soviets?
Well, that's a pretty interesting question. I think we Hungarians like to think of ourselves as kind of entrepreneur people who try to, I mean, in a good sense, but also who try to find loopholes and also make things work for them. So I think it is part of Hungarian culture to some extent that if we want to very hardly to survive. And if that's, you know, doing bars in sketchy places, then we will do bars in sketchy places. But I mean, this has been part of our history, sadly. So we had 500 years of prosperity, very nice things as the Hungarian kingdom, and then afterwards, sadly, 500 years of occupation from the Ottomans, the Austrians and the Russians, and we're kind of, that made us people who try to find survival in even one of the hardest circumstances as well.
Well, Australia was born in similar circumstances, but I've got to say, Istvan, we've certainly lost that entrepreneurial spirit, I think. I mean, we began as a penal colony, so, you know, top that, Hungary. Anyway, another thing you don't often associate with Hungary is to be honest, is humour. I mean, you know, Central Europeans to us Australians don't come across as predominantly funny people, but here's something I stumbled across in District 6 in Budapest, which is the sort of late night entertainment area. This is a sign that depicts a comical illustration of someone urinating on the street, and the sign warns that anybody doing so will wind up on YouTube. Now, again, Istvan, Australians like to think of themselves as pretty funny people, but our government would never be that funny or flippant. Is this typical of Hungarian humour?
I think so, but I'm also not sure if you rode some public transport, because on the metros and some of the trams you have similar kind of funny signs about, you know, don't have your hat on or don't eat at the public spaces. So actually that's kind of a funny campaign. I think the city of Budapest started. I think it's actually very strange because I think Hungarian humour is very much related to British humour, which I guess is related to Australian humour as well. There's some series which surprisingly were only very popular in the UK and of course some other places, well, and in Hungary, like Rang My Lord or Blackadder. So I think, I'm not sure why this is, but for some reason we have kind of this dark, witty humour, which is, I think, very, very closely related to British humour.
Well, there you go, viewers. There's another reason to want to visit Hungary, and I recommend it highly. Budapest is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I've got to thank Istvan Kiss from the Danube Institute for coming on to talk about it. Thanks, Istvan.
Thank you very much for having me.